Writing. We scientists and engineers have to do a lot of writing, particularly as you progress in your career. You'll find yourself doing more and more writing. And there's a lot of problems that particularly students come across. And right away, I can say the answer to the majority of those problems is proper outlining skills. So that's going to be the first thing we talk about. And then we'll just talk about some general rules for writing, aspects when we incorporate figures. And then we'll go on to some more interesting things like how to deal with writer's block, um, how to recognize and deal with lazy writing, and how to proofread. Outlining your writing. First, why do we outline? Well, an outline is going to help you organize things. You might be creating your outline and you're down low in that somewhere saying you need to describe something and then realize suddenly there is a piece of background information I'm missing. So then you go up to the top of your outline and add that you have to talk about that background information. And that might then encourage you to change something else. And the outline allows you to reorganize information, move things around, add and subtract without having to do that to a written document that would make that a lot more work. If you do not outline, you're setting yourself up for rewriting a lot of things. So you're outlining to not only get all the content there, but to put it into some kind of logical flow. I think also outlining when you're not writing, it's just a faster way to identify what it is you really want to say. What are your key points? Because you're not under pressure to word anything correctly. The outline's for you. You could word things sloppy, just get the ideas down. I can say when you have a very good outline, the writing is a whole lot easier because you know exactly what to write. You're not sitting there thinking, oh, what should I say next? You have that in your outline. The only task really the writing is then, how do I say it best? I also think when you have writer's block, outlining is a very good thing to do. Sometimes I don't even necessarily have writer's block. I'll just be writing and then suddenly get stuck on a certain paragraph. And I'll just quickly create a little tiny outline just for that paragraph. It's not even really an outline, it's a list of bullet points, and I might even start shuffling around the order. And if I have a nice bullet list of my key points, it then becomes really easy to write that paragraph and keep on writing. And as I mentioned before, proper outlining skills can fix the vast majority of problems you'll encounter with your writing. Here's how I like to outline. My outline is essentially my section headings. It's only when I get down to a low level that my outline becomes the paragraphs and the key points in the sentence. But I outline down to that level. But notice at a high level, I have things like abstract, introduction, section 3, device design, and then part A, theory of operation. So these are the sections of the document that I'm writing. But then when there's no more sections, I have paragraphs. So I'll have a paragraph that's serving a purpose. I'll type in its subject and then list all the key points I want to make. So I really, really like this way of outlining. It's what I teach, and the students that I observe practice this. It does very well for them. There's also what I call local outlining. Not sure what else to call it. That's probably a bad title, but it's when I don't really need an outline. I'm doing well writing, but I suddenly get stuck in the middle of that. And I'm writing a paragraph on some topic and just the words aren't flowing. I might stop and write in that document, make a little tiny outline, which is more just a list of key points that I want to make in that paragraph. And I maybe then work on the order of those bullets. Maybe I'll work on certain wordings within parts of sentences. And once I have this bullet list, very often I can go back and then finish this paragraph that I was stuck on and then just keep going. General rules and tips for writing. Whenever you write, you're always telling a story, and you want to hold the reader's hand very smoothly, clearly, methodically through your story. And you always want to start with the big picture and then start filling in the details from there. If you jump into the details, well, the reader doesn't even know the big picture yet and is not even really sure where in their mind to file this information. So start high and work down And at the very end, maybe go high again and tell the reader everything that happened. Don't ever let your equations or figures do the talking for you. So you wouldn't say, I designed this device and see figure one, and then just go on to the next topic. Oh, yes, see figure one, and this is my device and why I designed it and why I made these choices and how it works, and you're describing that. So when you have figures or equations, you don't just include them and assume they're self-evident to the reader. You have to explain each of those in your text. So how can you become a good writer? Well, I would recommend read a lot. Identify what you see as a really good article. Like, wow, that was really good. Well, what was good about that to you? Was it really good graphics? Was it really clear writing? What was it? Replicate what is good. I also recommend investing energy into things like formatting and graphics. And it's very easy to say, oh, I just like to write first and I'll come back later and do the formatting and the graphics. And when you do those things at the end, they tend to get forgotten about, they tend to get rushed, and you actually are creating more work for yourself in my experience. So work on very, very good formatting. You might spend a long time making a template that formats a document really well, but from that point forward, every time you write something, you can then borrow that template and not have to worry about the formatting again. So you're not really wasting effort. Also, great graphics. This works when I have writer's block. I'll stop writing, I'll go draw a picture. And if it's a really nice, snazzy picture, very often that motivates me to write again. So don't forget about those things. And coordinating your graphics with the text has everything to do with how clear your writing will be. I think a metric, if I've done really well writing something, I start to get jealous of the reader because very often what I'm writing about may have taken me years and lots of money, lots of frustration and tears and blood and sweat and all that. And I've just described this so well, so clearly to the reader, they're going to get it in mere minutes, and that makes me quite jealous. So think of how you feel about the reader, and don't make the reader work for it. Spell everything out, whatever you're writing. Make it easy for the reader. Of course, as they say about everything, practice, practice, practice. But I think you should start by reading some things, identifying what you like, and then practice. And then at the end, just writing is one thing, but you have to proofread, and it's very difficult to proofread your own stuff because you tend to stop seeing the mistakes. And there's some tricks and stuff that we will talk about. As I mentioned before, invest time and energy to make your graphics very good, but think about the purpose of those graphics and adjust exactly how much effort you put into that. For example, if you're just creating a draft of something, just planning things out, you can get away with really crude graphics because these rough drafts and things like that tend to be just for your eyes and they're not going out to the public. The next level, if you're preparing something for a meeting that you have every week and that meeting's relatively informal, well, you probably don't want to have your ugly sketches, but maybe it's just charts that are generated automatically with Microsoft Excel or MATLAB or things like that, but you're not really investing time to making them look snazzy. But then if you're giving a big presentation somewhere, you're going on a job interview, that's the time I think to dress up your graphics. And you can easily spend 70–80% of your time or more doing just the graphics. And so it is very time consuming. And that's why it's really only for special occasions would I recommend dressing things up to this level. One thing that does help a little bit is maybe I give a presentation and then I'm going to give the presentation again another time. I might take that opportunity to change one of the slides to snazzier graphics. And if I do that every time I present, after a dozen or so times I do this, I have some really, really attractive looking graphics in my presentations. So it's not necessarily wasted time for you. Format first, write second. I can't tell you how many people say, no, that's not the way I like to write. I like to write and then format it. And I can tell you now, it's out of laziness. Examine your feelings. And it's always going to be more work. So don't do that. Format first, write second. And the best way to do that is to create a template using styles in a tool like Microsoft Word. I know there's also open source versions or open source word processing software, and they all have a styles type of feature in there where you're not just clicking the bold and italic button, but you're actually creating styles in the template. And the benefit of doing that is once you set up your template, that may take some work, but then all you have to do is type. You don't have to worry about the formatting, and it's automatically formatted. And at the end, if suddenly, oh, I used the wrong font, all you have to do is go into your template and say use a different font, and it changes it throughout the entire font. Or you change a spacing above or below some heading, it fixes out throughout the entire document. You don't have to go in and manually do that. So there's so many benefits to using styles and formatting inside a word processing. So absolutely do that, and always write or type into a template where the formatting is already there. So format first, write second, and I promise you it will save you work. Keep it simple. Uh, Many people I talk to, there's multiple reasons where they write very complicated sentences. Some people I've talked to, they're just very paranoid to write a short sentence where they haven't explained everything and there's ways to poke holes in that sentence, and then they're not confident of the sentence. So they need a sentence, a giant sentence that goes on for an entire paragraph that just covers all the exceptions and everything like that. So it's complete and nobody can pick on it. And get over that. Write a very short, clear sentence, and then have another sentence that adds another detail or corrects something. That's perfectly okay to do. It's much better to use short sentences. And plain language. I think I did this in the beginning of my career. I would get in front of a crowd. I'd be really nervous. And for some reason, I'd start using my big words to make it sound like I was intelligent or something. And so there's this intimidation factor in here, I think, that makes people use a lot of big words. Now, you'll have to use big words. You don't want to make it sound completely like something out of first grade, but use as plain of language as you possibly can. There's no reason to talk technical just to make yourself sound smart. So don't do that. Be as concise as possible while still being clear and complete. So that's the best way I have of wording what to do. And there's a great quote by Albert Einstein: if you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, you don't understand it yourself. So maybe if the language you're using or the description you're using is so overly complicated, it may be that you yourself don't entirely understand it. And in which case, I'd put that writing down and I'd keep reading, I'd keep studying until you understand it. And think about things that you had a difficult time learning, but now seem super easy and simple, like maybe calculating the derivative of a sine function. In the beginning, maybe that was really difficult. Now it's probably super simple to you. And that's because you understand it well. And very likely you could go back and explain that even to a 6-year-old. So I really, really like that, and I use this in my writing all the time. I try to write to audiences that are uh, very much beginner, maybe not necessarily a 6-year-old, but very much a beginner in my topics. So use short sentences and avoid unnecessary or redundant words. So the silly example I have here, and I've even seen this as memes on Twitter and Facebook. Yeah, so here's my sentence. Delete all unnecessary words from a sentence that are not needed. Right, so that are not needed is not needed because you've already said unnecessary. And I do see this a lot. There's redundancy in sentences, or I'll read a sentence at the beginning of a paragraph and that same point is made maybe with different words at the end of the paragraph. And don't do that. Just say it once and don't say it again. In your writing, you also want to be very specific. Avoid the vague and generic kind of language. For example, it is a good thing to do. That's very generic. Well, what is good? What did you do? A better way to say that might be outlining makes writing easier by already having the key points and flow of information solved. That is very specific. This also comes up most of the time When you're writing a letter of reference for somebody or letter of support, and you don't want to just use generic language like this person's very intelligent and hardworking, period. You want to be more specific about this person is intelligent because I watched them solve this specific problem, and then you have a few sentences on what that problem was, how they solved it, and how that amazed you. So always be specific. Avoid the generic language. I think the generic language happens when you're lazy writing and just trying to fill space instead of actually communicate a point. Keep in mind when you write a sentence that the same sentence can mean very different things to different people, and you need to be cautious about this, and punctuation can help clear this up, but it's something to keep in mind. And I love this example, and you can completely change the meaning of the sentence by where you place emphasis. I never said we should kill him. 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 Right? You can read this many different ways, even though it's the same words. And the point of this is a reader can read your sentence and you're reading it one way and they interpret it another and they're confused. So try to think about this, stay open-minded, use punctuation to avoid this. I could insert commas and other things in these sentences to better convey that. And so think about that in your own writing. Do not be repetitive. The rule is say it once, say it well, say it correctly, and don't say it again. Proper outlining will definitely help you do this and help you from being repetitive. I think repetitiveness happens when maybe you're being lazy, you're filling space, you're just sort of writing off the cuff. You just start writing and things end up repeating, or if you're copy pasting from other resources, that can lead to repetitiveness. So just keep in mind, say it once, say it well, don't say it again. You want to be very consistent in your formatting. So here's an example of something extracted from some source. And we look at this and, well, let's point out some inconsistencies here. One of the first ones I notice is the inconsistency in the section headings. Notice at the top here, this is bold and evidently one type of font. Down here, this is not bold and it looks like a different kind of font. So, and if that's the same level section heading, well, then that's a mistake. Here's another one I noticed. There's inconsistent capitalization. Some people like to capitalize the first letter in the words in their section headings. That's not necessary to do. Some people like that. But if you're going to do that, stay consistent, because here's the next section heading, and now that word is not capitalized. So this would be inconsistent. There's inconsistent paragraph indentations. You can choose to not indent your paragraphs or indent the paragraphs, but you don't want to mix the two. And if you choose to indent them, always indent by the same amount. Don't mix that either. There's inconsistent font size. Notice the font size here is one thing, and it definitely got bigger down here. Again, stay consistent. There's different inconsistent justification here. Notice this second blurb of text is left justified. See, it's lined up on the left and kind of jagged on the right. Whereas here, you're justified on the right and the left. So this would be called fill justify. I tend not to like fill justify only because I think it inserts awkward amounts of space different places. There's some tricks you can do to that to get the fill justify to work a little bit better and not have those indents, but I tend to only use that when I'm doing artistic things like posters and I want that dual alignment. Otherwise, I don't ever fill justify stuff. I always use left justify. So what can help fix all this is using the styles feature inside your word processor. Don't just click bold italic to format your document. Use the actual styles. So you're assigning styles to your headings and to your text, and that will make your document very consistent. Oh, and here's the last one. The units are inconsistent. Here I'm using the abbreviation for millimeters, and over here I spelled it out. Pick one and stick to it. Really, the proper thing to do in a STEM type of journal article would be to use the abbreviation and not to spell it out. But proper formatting of numbers and equations is something I cover in another video. Figures. I like to sketch my figure first on paper because I'll sketch the figure and then I'll go and I'll write about it. And as I'm writing, I might realize, oh, I want to point something out in this figure that wasn't initially highlighted, and then I can go back to my sketch and do that. Or then maybe I never discuss a certain aspect and I'll cross it off in my sketch. So it gives me a quick way to put stuff in my figure, and you should really only have stuff in your figure that is pertinent to what you're talking about, that you've called out from the text. You don't want any extra details, and you don't want any missing details. So if you spend a lot of time drawing a figure and then write, you might find yourself having to go back and spend a lot more time to fix that. I still sometimes do that because I'll draw figures when I have writer's block. So I'll produce a snazzy figure, go write about it, and then I find myself, I trip over that a little bit because now I may have to go back to that figure and edit it. But most of the time, I like to sketch my figures. And whether I do it on paper or something on the computer doesn't really matter, but think about doing that. Key rules for your figures. It's a common mistake because I'll pick on students and say, hey, this font is too small, that's line's too small. And I might ask them, okay, plot sine x. And they'll take an entire page, a full page to plot sine x, thinking, boy, this guy's really going to be happy with my plot because he's going to be able to read everything because it's so huge. And that's silly. That's amateur time. Your figures should always be as small as possible such that they're still easily interpreted. So how small can you make it that you can still see everything very clearly and simply? The second bullet, all figures should be called from the text and fully described. You don't ever want to insert a figure and never call it out from the text because you'll leave the reader confused of why is that there. And when you do call it out, don't just call it out and let the figure do all of its talking. So don't say, hey, I designed a device and see figure 7, and then you go on. So, okay, the device I designed is in figure 7. It is a square box with a door, and I designed this door to be opened by somebody with an average height of 5 feet, and I chose this doorknob because I had beautiful brass, right? And you're going on and you're describing all of these details in the text. Let the text do the talking. Pretend almost the reader never gets to see the picture. What would you want in the text so that that reader can still follow along? And as I mentioned before, only include details in the figure that are important to the discussion. Anything extra is going to be confusing, and the reader's going to think of missing something or whatever. It's never good. So don't include unnecessary or extra details. And also, if you're talking about something, make sure that's in the figure. Make sure the figure's not missing anything. And what we'll talk about in other videos is all the other basic rules for graphics, making sure your fonts are big enough but not too big, your lines are thick enough but not too thick, that you have even amount of white space and a comfortable amount of white space going around, and everything's clear, and all the graphics things that we talk about in that video. How to deal with writer's block. Everybody gets writer's block. Well, what is it? Well, it's the condition where you're stuck. You don't know how to write. You don't even know how to proceed with writing. And there's lots of reasons that somebody could have writer's block. You could be under stress and you're not thinking correctly. Maybe you're a professor saying, get this paper done by tomorrow, and now all of a sudden you have to write a whole paper, and the writing just doesn't come because of that. It could be because you're tired. It might be because you don't know what you're talking about. That's another one. So Other reasons it can happen, and maybe more reasons it happens to me, is perfectionism. I tend to be a perfectionist at heart. And, if I write a sentence and it is not absolutely perfect, then I'll delete it. And, well, that can make me stuck. Other things, imposter syndrome. We have another whole video talking about psychological aspects in graduate school, but imposter syndrome is essentially you don't feel like you deserve to be there. Everybody around you is a super smart scientist or engineer, and you're just kind of there. And you're not really as smart or anybody, and everybody feels this way. I feel this way all the time to this day, and that sort of humbling aspect of that can hinder you from writing. It may be you're having a bad day. You're not motivated. You're lacking inspiration that day. Could be a lack of creativity. You just don't know how to describe something, or there needs to be a figure there and you're not sure how to draw the figure. Some more legitimate things, I guess, life distractions. You might have a kid, a job, there's a noisy environment, your roommates are noisy, family problems, so many other things that can be preventing you from writing. Maybe you're sick, maybe you're depressed, maybe you have financial problems. Oh man, there's a whole bunch of reasons of what can stop you from writing. It's almost a miracle when you can finally write. So what do we do about all this? Well, one trick is just write something. And there's a famous quote attributed to Ernest Hemingway: write drunk, edit sober. Well, it turns out Ernest Hemingway didn't actually say this. It seems like something he would say because he did drink a lot. He's known for that. And I'm not saying to get drunk at all. The way I use this for myself is just write something, write garbage, and then come back and fix it later when you're feeling better. Now, what I've noticed for me when I have writer's block and I apply this and I go ahead and I write garbage, when I come back later, when the writing is coming to me and I go back to fix that, it doesn't sound like garbage anymore. So it's almost like I don't get writer's block. I just get periods of where I'm super critical of myself. So maybe that happens to you, or maybe you have writer's block for other reasons. You could just stop and make an outline of the key points that you want to make. Go paragraph by paragraph. And if you can only think of certain parts of phrases, just write down those parts of phrases. Maybe later, the other parts of the sentences will come to you. So the overall thing, just write something and then come back and fix it later. Don't keep deleting what you write. I use this one a lot. If I have writer's block, I'll stop writing and I'll create my figures. I think this is one of the reasons why I started really working on how to improve my graphic skills to make the graphics better and better. It's because I had writer's block, and so I practiced my graphics. But having a really snazzy graphic to put in your paper or publication can motivate writing, and it definitely does me. Like, wow, that's a cool figure that explains a lot. Now I'm going to go put the words to it that goes with the figure to step the reader through this. And you're not wasting time doing this because you need the figures. And in the end, you'll have much better figures. Something else that works sometimes, get out of your ordinary environment. Maybe you're at your house, you have noisy roommates. Maybe you're in your office at your university and there's too much noise going on, there's construction. Or it could be just you're there all the time and that is no longer an area of creativity to you. Go somewhere else. Go to a local tea shop. Maybe your family owns a cabin in the woods and you can go there for some peace. Get out of the environment. Maybe you even just go sit in the library or somebody else's office. Get it in an environment that's not your normal environment. And very often that can inspire writing and let you write easier. Let's talk specifically about lazy writing because this is something that I see a lot. So I think, in my opinion, when somebody's reading your document, they probably don't want to read it, and they're looking for reasons not to read it. And if you're lazy writing, you're going to give your reader all kinds of reasons to stop reading your document because it's just not doing it for them. So here is a litmus test to know if you're lazy writing or not. Suppose you just wrote a few sentences. Does that writing convey something new and useful? If not, maybe you were just trying to fill space. Is the writing critical to the document? If you could delete what you just wrote and it wouldn't affect your document in the slightest, well, delete it. It's probably just lazy writing. Well, that's my third bullet. If you can delete it without affecting the message of the document, then just make sure it's deleted. One thing I see from my students a lot, they know something has to be written, so they just puke out words to fill the space, and when I read it, literally nothing has been said. So if you're just writing to fill space because you know something needs to be written, that's lazy writing. Or lazy writing if you're letting your equations and figures do the explaining for you. Pretend the person has a version of your document that has your figures blacked out. So you still refer to your figure, but you'll talk the reader through everything in words. Here's the first example of one type of lazy writing that I do see a lot. I call it stating the obvious. So over on the right is a table relating different values of x and f. Now I'm going to read this text to you. Table 1 summarizes the relation between f and x. 3 different values of x are given in the leftmost column. The rightmost column gives corresponding values of f. The first row in the table shows which column corresponds to which variable. The second row in the table shows that when x is equal to 0.1, the value of f is 10. The third row in the table shows that when x is equal to 0.2, the value of f is 15. The fourth row in the table shows that when x is equal to 0.3, the value of f is 17. Wow, that's a big paragraph, but it literally did nothing. Everything in that paragraph you can get from the table. Instead, you should be talking about, well, what does x represent? Is that a length? Is that a distance? What is f? How is it calculated from x? Or how is it measured from x? How does it come from x? What is the meaning of that trend? Can we get any conclusions from it? So we want to get deeper and more philosophical. So stating the obvious is definitely one type of lazy writing. Example number 2 is something I call generic writing. If you can write a whole bunch of stuff and read that and come away knowing absolutely nothing, it's way too generic. So here we're talking about a figure. It shows a device with an input and an output. And I'll read this paragraph to you. Figure 1 illustrates the device designed in this project. The device has an input that receives all of the data and settings required by the device. The input to the device is illustrated in the figure by the arrow pointing left to right. The device then operates on the inputs to generate the output. The device itself is illustrated by the gray box that is labeled device. The output of the device is indicated by the rightmost arrow. After characterizing the device in the lab, the output was very consistent with predictions. This is so generic, I could be talking about so many different things here. Well, what is the device? What purpose is it? We're not getting into any of that. So this is another type of lazy writing that I see a lot. A third example, when we're being way too brief and we're just trying to let our figures do the talking for us. So here's a figure 1 showing some kind of electrical circuit. And then in the text we say, an electrical circuit was designed and manufactured in this project. See figure 1. Wow. We really should be saying, what does the circuit do? Where did we get it manufactured? What did it cost? How do we use it? How could we do it better, right? There's so many other things that you could talk about with this circuit, but instead, we're just saying it's a circuit, see figure 1, and well, that's lazy writing. Another example, when you write to yourself, if you are writing on paper the words that you would say to yourself while working on a project, that's not going to be understandable to anybody but you. So, all right, figure 1, it's showing some kind of design. Here's the words. Grab the first wire and connect it to the desired place. Solder and watch for bad signs. Turn on the circuit and look for indicator. Disable the clock when finished. Well, maybe those are the words going on in your head, but I really have no idea what any of that stuff means. Bad signs of what? How do you know it's a bad sign? There's just so much wrong with that. So if you outline, I think you can fix this because you're planning out your document, you're planning out a logical flow of how you present, and just don't use the words that you say to yourself in your head as you're casually working. If you're doing that, that's lazy writing. What are some reasons for lazy writing? Well, I think this happens, one, when students really don't know what to write, or they're just burned out and they're burned out from their research and they're just trying to get stuff written. It can also happen when you're concentrating more on what you need than what the reader needs. So what does the reader need to understand stuff? They probably need a high level description of what's going on. You need to define all of the terms and include clear figures. Whereas if you're just writing for you, you could probably write very brief and choppy and you can understand it. So what you write is not for you, it's for the reader. And so try to think that way. And the second to last bullet here, writing the words you say to yourself in your head. Definitely don't do that because that only makes sense to you. It will not make sense to everybody else. And lazy writing can happen when you're very busy. So maybe you're not necessarily being lazy, but it may be that you only have 10 minutes to write something that should be an all-day project. And probably not right to call that lazy writing, but it leads to the same symptoms. So how do we overcome lazy writing? One, you just have to have discipline and don't do it. Your research deserves better. Don't ruin it just with sloppy, quick writing. Be proud of yourself. So try to be honest with yourself. And with time and practice, you will realize when you are lazy writing and just not in the right frame of mind when you're writing. So when you catch that, stop or try to change your mind somehow. You can put the document aside, just come back later. It may just be that this particular day is not your time to write, but tomorrow may be. Now, if you have a deadline, sometimes you don't always have that option and you still got to do your best. Maybe you have to slap yourself, take a cold shower, or something else like that. Here's another thing where I think an outline can help. And you might be hesitant to create an outline because maybe you're in a rush and you think, oh, that's a whole extra step. But an outline is actually going to save you time because if you write something and then have to move things around or you need to make another point, it tends to lead to a lot of rewriting and moving, big sections around. So an outline can help you with that and can help you overcome lazy writing. And so you can see more about dealing with writer's block. Lazy writing and writer's block, I think, is very related, can sometimes happen for the same reasons. Proofreading. It is tough to proofread your own work. I really struggle with this because I try to take my time and write, and by the time I'm done that, what I've written is so familiar to me that I'm just not seeing the mistakes anymore. So some tricks that I do that help a lot is I will read aloud. Maybe it's kind of embarrassing, but if I've written something, I will literally speak the words aloud and I will catch more. In Microsoft Word, there's a feature where it will read to you. I recently wrote a book and I did this. I had Microsoft Word literally read to me the entire book. It does a bad job of equations, even though it tries. I wish it had an option to just skip the equations or just say equation 1. But other than that, that worked really well for me. Of all the things, that worked. But of all things that help in proofreading is give it to somebody else who hasn't seen it. Try to get your document as far along as possible before that because you probably have one round with that proofreader. If you show them a rough draft, you fix it, then you show them the final draft, not only is that doubling their time, well, they themselves have already seen it once and will be less likely to see mistakes. So try to use them only once and as late in the process as possible. Another thing you do is just set your writing down for at least a week and come back and proofread it. If you have a bad memory, maybe it doesn't even need to be a week.